01001001001001. Wait. Today I want to do advice for prospective game programmers. For those of you who are thinking about going into game programming. The TLDW is, it's different than other kind of programming jobs you could get out there. I'm going to make this a fun Friday because it's fun for me. May not be fun for you, but I like it. Bear in mind, I've only done game programming, but I have lots of friends who are in other industries doing programming, including the military, and I did do one project for the Department of Defense. Go look at the attached video, Troika's Secret Fourth Project. So now let's walk through all the ways I think game programming is different than other programming that you could do for a living. I'll get the beginning right, the easy part out of the way. The money's less and the stability is less. I'm comparing this to other fields you could go into. And yes, programming right now seems unstable in lots of fields. Well, it's really unstable in game programming, but tech in general is looking unstable because of AI. But the money's also less. Almost everybody I know who works in non-game programming fields makes more money. So think about that before you want to become a game programmer. If that's important to you, wasn't as important to me, if it's important to you, think about it. Another big one, which will bother a lot of you, is specifications for the software, in this case, game specifications, are far less specific and far more likely to change than they are in just about any other field. If you're making software, embedded software for a car, say, it's very unlikely they're going to come back to you and go, oh, we decided to give the car a fifth wheel. We decided to put 3 axles on this car. That's very unlikely to happen. Not in the game industry. You may be working on something that you consider to be a core part of the game, and then the designer goes, oh, we decided to do it this way. Or we took that out and replaced it with this. And there are reasons for doing this. You can't just get mad at the designers and going, why are they being whimsical? Maybe they put it in and it wasn't fun. Maybe they put it in and it was not working with some other feature that was more important to have. So if you're one of those programmers who wants all the specs handed to you up front and you never want them changing, don't do game programming. Another thing about game programming is there's far fewer standards. You are far less likely to be told by a game director, this is how you have to do something. They may have some variable naming and function naming conventions. There may be like, this is how we break things into different code modules and stuff. But there are far, far fewer standards than you will get in other industries. Things that you have to code towards, especially if you're doing embedded systems or especially if you're in the military. There are lots of standards you have to abide by. So sometimes you read that there are people who only write a few lines of code a day, and that's because everything they write has to be so double and triple checked and tested, which doesn't happen in games. Conversely, you will probably, as a game programmer, have to get far more creative in your code than in other industries. If you're told to do something in another industry and you're given a very specific specification and you have to follow particular standards, that really limits how you might want to approach programming it. That doesn't happen in games. You may get a specification saying, we're going to have grenades. And the closest the specification gives you is there's going to be an animation, and at a certain frame of the animation, that's when the grenade launches. And it goes to where the player was aiming within a certain radius, maybe dependent on the skill. And the designer will have an idea of maybe what that is. But how you actually get it there, how you compute that, that's going to be up to you. And there's a lot of different ways of doing it. And a lot of it will depend on what information you may have to give back to the UI, how you may want to make this skill dependent, whether randomness factors in, whole bunch of things. And you get to be creative with that and give all those different options to the designer and the UI maker and basically figure out what you're going to do. So if you don't like being creative and you're like, if you're a programmer, it's like, tell me exactly what you want and then I will give that thing to you, you probably don't want to do game programming. I've mentioned this before in other videos. I couldn't find a particular one, but wow, are you going to need a deep, deep knowledge of hardware, way more than probably any other kind of programming except embedded code on a particular piece of hardware. And that's because you're going to write code and it's going to be running on a vast variety of CPUs with different video cards and different sound cards and different input devices, and you need to know all that. Think your input's coming from a keyboard? Maybe you guys are also going to allow controllers. What controllers? What about the new adaptive controllers? What about those ones where you can wave your hands around and it's reading data from that? Can you handle that? Do you know how to handle that? Do you have any idea how that hardware works? Where you're going to find out. Is it going to be run on a computer or a console? Right then, the knowledge of how that hardware is set up is going to affect everything you code. And like I said, maybe embedded code programmers have to know hardware that deeply, but it's usually one particular piece of hardware. If you're making software that's going to go in a car, you know the chip that's in the car. In this case, lots of chips out there. CPUs, GPUs, sound cards. Have at it. On top of this, and this is something that probably is true for game programming more than any other, performance is very highly prioritized. Yes, everybody wants their code to be fast, and if you're making, say, a spreadsheet, you may want to optimize the code to reduce the cell recalculation time. But are you doing it to the millisecond? Because you will be in game code. If you want a game that runs at 60 frames per second, that means each frame has about 16 milliseconds to run. All the code calculations that you want to do in each frame has to guarantee be done in 16 milliseconds or less. How do you do that? By writing really performant, optimized code. You won't be doing that in other code types. You'll probably at some point need to look at what comes out of the compiler in assembly language and decide whether you need to rewrite it yourself. Not a lot of people do that anymore, and they just rely on the compiler and the optimization flags, but you may have to do that. And again, except for some very rare embedded code applications, I can't think of anything that has to optimize to this level. You know, maybe car or medical equipment has to be valid to the millisecond, but I don't know, a spreadsheet, a word processor, that's not doing it. But here's the other thing, and I can't think of anything that has this as a priority. Fun. You have to make the game fun. And yeah, you may think that's the designer's job, but it's also the programmer's job. Other specs for non-games may prioritize user efficiency or how easy it is to use, which a lot of which will fall on the UI designer and the UI programmer. But games need to be fun. That's a big chunk of it. It's fun. Is this game actually fun to play? Nobody says, is Excel fun to use? Is PowerPoint fun to use? Was Clippy fun? What this means is when things are being specified in the game specification by designers, they're trying to think of that. But that means if something turns out not to be fun, it has to be changed. Either the specification has to be changed, but sometimes it's how it was coded is what's making it not fun. It's too slow. It's the way you coded it doesn't allow certain information to be pushed out to the UI per frame, and the UI can then track something. Like if it's a grenade, you didn't do a parametric equation. It's gonna be hard to show that. Now that UI wants to show the parabola that's going on, and it really has to go on that parabola because you're trying to throw the grenade in an event, and it better go in the event if the arc showed it going in the event. You may have to change that because you didn't do it. You didn't code it in a way that can be made fun. So you're redoing the code for fun. That drives a lot of programmers crazy, by the way. Here's one that doesn't happen in a lot of other software fields: trends. I could also call this whims of the users. Basically, compared to other software, what you're making changes because what people like at the moment changes. Compared to other software, no. Word processors, spreadsheets, all that, those have remained relatively at their core the same. And when they do have complaints, it's almost always user interface related. I wish this was easier to understand. I wish the information was conveyed better. But in games, we have like, oh, turn-based is really in. Now it's out. Now it's back in. This is just a trend. It has nothing to do with how you programmed it. It's what you programmed is no longer what people like to play. That trend is out. Maybe the PlayStation was hot. Oh, now the Switch is the hot platform. Oh, now it's PC. Guess what? They're all coded differently. They could have the exact same design specification, but your code is going to be wildly different. And guess who has to do that? You. And that kind of is related to something else, which is feedback. When you're coding in other disciplines, most of the software feedback you're going to get is on its use. When people are using other pieces of software, they usually comment on the user interface and how they're actually using the device or the software itself. Game feedback is very different. Most game feedback comes from people thinking that they're game designers and they think they're better than your game designers. So they will give you feedback not because something is coded wrong or is necessarily unfun. They just think it would be better if it was this other way. And that's something that you're going to have to learn to deal with and accept, possibly make changes, possibly not. Maybe you can buck that over the designers and go, you decide this. But again, if they decide on making a change to the design, that will certainly require a change to your code. These are most of the differences I could think of between game software and other product software. If this interests you, you may want to watch a video I have called Sources of Game Programmer Frustration. I'll link it below as well. I'm not trying to discourage any of you. In fact, that's why I made this a Fun Friday, because that was fun, wasn't it? I'm just trying to give you some advice here. If you're thinking about becoming a game programmer, think about what I just said here and think, does that match me? Does it match my interests and my temperament? Because if it doesn't, you could be making yourself really unhappy going into game programming rather than any other kind of software engineering. Anyway, hope you have a good Friday.